Good morning, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. How are you all doing today? My name is Infrared, and welcome to the Puzzle Advent Calendar 2024. If you have watched previous videos of mine, or followed me on social media, you will see that I have an interest in making these types of puzzles. The generic name for these is interlocking puzzles, and the name for that is fairly obvious. You have a load of individual pieces, which should move around in interesting ways, just like that. Now, for the most part, I tend to stick with these types of puzzles because they're just easier to make. However, I do also have other ones which have an extra frame around it. What I want to do in this video is effectively combine these. I have interlocking pieces and an outside frame, just like here. This is what it looks like in my CAD software, so you can see exactly what I just said. 4 pieces and 3 outer frames. I do have another version with 2 outer frames instead. However, I think the bigger version is going to be more interesting to build. I'll put it like that. So the beginning of any woodworking project starts with, dare I say, wood. Starts big, you make it smaller. That's the obvious bit. For this project, I'm going to be using mahogany because we had some left at work. Asked if I could take it, and the answer was, yeah, sure. A few things I want to say for safety reasons. When I'm not using this table saw, I have the blade as low as possible and have this side sled covering the blade, so that if somehow I accidentally turn it on, nothing will happen. And also it's not even plugged in. Another thing is I'm going to roll my sleeves up. This is entirely for safety. This watch I'm going to keep on because I do that at work as well. It does not cause a problem. First step, as I just said, is take wood, make it smaller. Basic setup of the machine. Undo that screw and then slowly lift the blade up. Going to set the side to be very close to the blade but not touching it. And I'm getting rid of the side sled as well. I don't need that right now, I will need that later. First I need to make sure the end is nice and square at 90 degrees. So just barely cut off a side of that. And as well as that, I have a vacuum cleaner underneath this table. So the table saw is hooked into the vacuum cleaner. You can see that right here at the back. So when this machine turns on, dust extraction also turns on at the same time. Step 1 is make a nice square edge, and there's a tripod on the way there, so that might not be easy. Now that I have a nice flat reference, I can actually start measuring. What I'm going to do first is set my actual measurements to be bigger than what I need, so then I can eventually go smaller, instead of immediately setting to the exact right distance and that being wrong. The end distance I need is 6 centimeters exactly, so I've now set the side stop to 61 millimeters. And I already know there is a tiny gap between the metal side and the saw blade itself, so this is naturally going to be bigger. So I can cut once, measure, and then adjust. Possibly. Out of habit, I'm going to use a set of calipers. I have pretty much exactly 61 millimeters. Now this one's too big. I can adjust the side stop to be the distance that I am too big. Should be able to set this to pretty much exactly 60. And then it should be okay. One thing I want to say is I'm actually using the thickness of these markings as my tolerance. This is quite common if you actually make stuff, but it is also important to think which side of the marking you are going to use. And there we have it. Now I've done the measuring and setting up properly, now I can simply cut the pieces. I already have 1, I need 4, I'm going to make 5 because eventually I'm going to mess something up. It's always good to have a spare in the beginning rather than needing to make spares once you're already done. Actually, I lied, I have 6, because I just used the entire length of that one piece of wood I had. Either I have 2 spares, or I can use those 2 extra bits for a different project. Either way, I'm done here for now. Now this is a lovely piece of equipment called a milling machine. It is so lovely, in fact, it does not fit all in frame of one go. So what makes this machine so special is you have the motor up here, which connects to a mill, which is why this machine is called a milling machine. These two have the same name. As well as that, you have the actual important bit, which is the work holding, and then 2 hand wheels, one you cannot see out of shot, one you can see in shot. These 2 hand wheels move the table from side to side and forward to backward. There's another one out of shot here at the top, which moves the entire thing up and down. So this is a 3-axis system. So what I need to do for all of these pieces, for the pieces and the frame, is I need to take the square and mill out an L-shaped cutout. So for that I need to tram the vise. What that means is make this edge of the wood perfectly parallel to these metal cutouts in the actual base. So that when I use the hand wheel, that piece of wood moves perfectly in a straight line. Therefore, the cutter also cuts a perfectly straight line. I do want to explain the work holding for a milling machine. This system that this mill uses is very similar to the, I guess, more standard systems for physically larger machines. This metal piece is called a collet, and it's a ring of metal with a lot of slits cut in the side, so that it can very slightly compress in. If I put the collet into the actual tightening nut, and then put a mill in there, what this means is when I screw this into the actual spindle of the motor, once the nut gets tightened, the collet also tightens and squeezes on the actual shaft of the cutter. Then comes the fun part. Moving this mill all the way down, I'm going to set one of the edges of the cutter to just barely touch the wood, and then I'm going to very slightly tighten these nuts on the side for actually holding the vise in. Step 3, I'm going to move the entire carriage, as it's called, from side to side, and if there's any deviation out of parallel, I will see this in the vise and adjust accordingly. So now I'm pretty much all set up to do the actual milling for all of the pieces. I did also switch to a bigger cutter because I'm going to remove a lot of material, so I want to do this in as few passes as possible, really. There are 2 things I need to set up, which are the depth and the width. I'm going to set how wide the cutter is using the front dial, moving the vise forwards and backwards. So for the very first cut, I'm only going to remove maybe about 1 or 2 millimeters. So as you can see now, everything is much more dirty than it was previously, because I'm very nearly done with all the milling. I now have just the last step to go, which is this side. And similar to previously, I can measure just how thick this is, almost exactly 12 millimeters, and adjust the height of the blade accordingly, instead of just going down a bit. So my caliper's read exactly 2 millimeters difference. I'm going to set the height about 1.5. So I'm going to take one cut, measure, then if everything's right, I should be yet still 0.5 millimeter too big. And that worked. I am still exactly 0.5 millimeter too big. So now I'm done with all of the L-shaped cutouts, it's actually time to cut the pieces to length. And because I want to overcomplicate this build, I'm going to cut all of the joints at 45 degrees. There we go. Set this cross slide to 45 degrees. Which may not be the most accurate thing in the universe, but it's certainly good enough for what I need, because I have used this before. Set the side sled to just barely come in contact. Passes cleanly. So now we can begin. The first cut is going to be fairly easy because I really just want to cut one of the angles, but the second is where it's going to get more fun. You, I can move out of the way because I don't really need you. So number one is finally done, which is fairly simple, and I did try to cut as much off as possible, but still have this angle come to exactly the end of the piece, so that I waste as little material as possible. So now I've done that with one, I can use a side stop in the side, so that all the pieces are at the same length. Now these are still set long, so I really don't care. It's just easier for me to do click once and cut all of these to shape. Now with the trick that I just said earlier, I set this distance to 61 millimeters and measure this again, and I'm getting 63. Which is bigger than what I need, which is good. So now it's pretty simple. I can use the measurement I currently have minus the dimension that I've measured and set this to 50. I'm going to go 59 for now. I may want to do 58 at some point later. Again, I'm going to measure and check, not just doing everything in one go. So now all 8 of the frame pieces are done, and quickly as a sanity check I'm going to put tape around all of these to see if these angles are actually perfectly 45 degrees. So I've taped up all 3 now, just to see if they fit, and I can say that they do. Obviously it's not glued together yet, so everything's still very slightly wobbly, and if you look on the back you might be able to see some gaps in the pieces here, especially if you hold it to the light. But that's easy enough to fix once I actually do add glue to these and make them a solid piece. As well as that, the interior distance is important to know, so I have some other pieces of the same size. If I put 4 in as a 2x2 grid, I can see they go in with very little wobble. I can take another one and put it on top as a hat. So you can see there is some wobble, but not all that much. Another thing for this puzzle is that central hole, which is perfectly big enough. And I can stack all 3 on top of each other, much like the finished puzzle. Then this is perfectly flush. Not perfect yet, because the distance of the tape actually does add some small gaps. That is the tolerance I hold myself to, but once this is all together, everything will fit perfectly nice. So after cleaning up the mill area and sanding these pieces, which was exactly as fun as you'd imagine it to be, I can now start on the part of the project which is the exact reason why I chose the 3-frame version rather than the 2-frame version I showed earlier. Because I have one piece which has an L-shape cutout, and I have another very thin piece of wood. They come together just like that. It's pretty simple, and these pieces, the smaller pieces, are the same length as the outer, which is fine because I can use a lot of tape to hold everything in place. Might not see this too well on camera, but I'm trying my best. On one side, on the other. Match the grain direction, just like that. Now that's one vaguely in place. Tear off a piece of tape. Put it underneath the large piece, then fold it over. Like so. So that one side is now flush, But these two are now flush together. I'll do the same on the top. This is just to hold it in place, really. One there and one there. So that now the two ends are supported. I'll put another piece of tape in the middle so that it actually holds on properly. One there. Over the middle, just like that. That's all wrapped up. One down, full to go. So I've done this exact same process loads before, so I'm pretty used to it by now, but I still need to do exactly the same process to make sure I get everything right. First step is to vaguely get the side stops to the size. I'm specifically going to keep it a bit bigger, because you might not be able to see it this out of shot. There is a small dial here, where I can very slightly move the side slide in and out. So in order to get a good fit with everything, I will start big and slowly work my way smaller. So I just need to set this once to slightly more than 10 millimeters, cut all the pieces, and then very slowly readjust to get a good fit. Alright, so with my calipers, this now is set to 10.4, which is good enough for what I need right now. So that's one piece done, and now you can see my plan that I also tend to mark off the actual units that I just cut. Just so I know that I cut everything, and also if I happen to miss something, I know which piece has which cut missing. Repeat the same process 10 billion times. So cut number 1 is all done. Now for cut number 2. So this is 20 millimeters. I'm going to loosen this screw, move you to just about 21 or so. It is really just the same thing over and over again. Slightly more than 20, I'll do another test cut, measure, and adjust if necessary. I do want to be bigger than the actual measurement, but I want to be bigger by only about half a millimeter, just to make everything else on the milling machine a bit easier later. Made from love. So now while I have all of this set up, I'm also going to do the pieces for the frames itself. Now, these have a weird shape, but the logic is exactly the same. I have them marked out on a piece of paper as well, and one of the flat sides I've actually marked it off with A, B, C for the different frames. That flat section will be towards the flat section of the slide. So I have skipped forward a bit, and I already have the mill completely set up to what I actually need to do. Before I do, I just want to explain what I have. The mill bit is exactly as normal, but I'm going to use a parallel so that I can just clamp the pieces of wood in and get exactly the same depth from the bottom every single time. This piece does wobble about a bit, but that doesn't matter. It's really the sideways pressure that's the important bit. So the first few passes are going to be maybe about 2 millimeters, just to get most of the material away. And then once I am quite close to the actual depth I need, I will stop and then measure the actual depth I need rather than going down just a bit. As well as that, mostly just for my own sake, I've also marked off, just with a marker, what I need to cut off and what I need to leave there. Because I have made that mistake before. So it's now significantly later and everything is significantly more dirty. As I said previously, I need to take this apart and raise up the actual cutter itself. More or less there, roughly. It's not all too tight yet. Now I can take my set of calipers and actually measure. So my end dimension is 10 millimeters, and what I have now is just over 12. I can raise the spindle just enough that it can actually clear the material. Move it forwards and back down. So, well, I can see this, you might not be able to, but the blade is just barely touching the actual wood itself. So now I'm going to back out, lower the actual blade itself only about 1 millimeter, which is less than I actually need. But now I can tighten everything, do one cut, measure again, do another cut, etc., and then slowly creep up to the actual dimension that I want, instead of just... Hoopla! There we go. Like I said before, end dimension is 10 millimeters. Now I'm at about 11.5. Because if everything is set up correctly, I should still be bigger than my actual dimension that I need. Even at my job, this is sort of the same process what I do all the time, is I take a lot of effort to set up a machine once, guarantee it's correct, and then do exactly the same thing a million times. So this is not as stupid as you may think. So now, for hopefully the last time, we are back at the table saw to do the very final adjustments of the actual pieces. I could technically do this at the same time I'm doing the initial cuts, but the reason I'm doing the final adjustment after removing the middle pieces is that I can actually measure this gap using other pieces of the puzzle to see if they actually fit together. I have had previous things that I've made where my calipers read exactly the distance that I need, but pieces don't fit. And the opposite as well, where according to my measurements, this bit is still too big, but the actual pieces of wood do fit nicely. So, this is just personal preference, and this is honestly where a lot of the time goes in to make the fit perfect. And just like the initial cuts I did all the way back, I need to set this side sled once, and then it can do everything. So it's not any more difficult, it's just my personal preference for order operations. I also do want to mention that now, because I have removed the loaded material in the middle, if I hold the piece into this orientation, there is still enough material to push against the back, and everything is perfectly stable. But if I rotate it 90 degrees, it has a habit of moving side to side. So the simple answer is, have another bit of wood at the back, and use that to cut. May have taken a while, but we are finally there. Two pieces fit in perfectly nicely. So I've now skipped ahead quite a bit, it is now a week later, because I messed up. Simple said. Usually what I would do for these pieces worked perfectly fine on the table saw, but I only realised now that for this type of piece, I have cut away far too much material to actually have anything to use. So what I did for this, for all of these pieces, was use my milling machine again and cut away that extra part manually on every single piece, which is a lot more work. So I decided not to record any of that because I simply needed to think. It's now all done. Every single one of these was manually checked and fits perfectly well. I have actually taped one of them together so that you can see why I'm doing this. These pieces, you may have figured out, come together at an angle, and once they're together, two 45 degrees makes one 90-degree corner. This is exactly the reason why I chose to make the frames at 45 degrees. If you look at this, on the back, you have two angles forming squares. What I could have done is just make two long pieces and two shorter pieces and cut them together at 90 degrees, but that is boring and significantly easier, so I chose not to. And just as a check for myself, I can take one of these pieces I already have, and they fit inside of these holes nicely, like that. So now it's time to sand all of these pieces and then glue the frames together. So sanding the pieces themselves is not particularly difficult. This is fairly easy, especially because these are so small. I'm going to take the outside 90 degrees and that's all you need. Just do very slightly soften the edges so you can hold them in your hand properly. Then I'm going to do the tops. 4, and finally these tiny corners as well. And that's it, on both sides. That's it done. Pieces themselves are fairly easy, and for the actual frames themselves, it's again mostly just the same thing. This time I'm going to remove the sanding block so that I have a bit more accuracy for the pieces. I'm not going to sand the diagonal cuts because they're getting glued together. I just want to do the inside cuts while I can still reach them really. So just the insides, because when they're glued together, I really have no choice. Nothing major now, just those. The outside I'll do once these are all glued together. So the gluing together of the frames is going to be basically the same as gluing together for the individual pieces, where I'm really just going to use tape, and that is plenty strong enough. Now, the reason I did not sand the outside faces of these, for 2 reasons. One, I have them labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, just so I know which orientation they go in. And second, once the glue has settled, then I can sand the outside to make sure all the pieces are perfectly flush. So the first step, I'm going to lay them out in a line, and then put a piece of tape in each single joint so that I can fold them together. That's all set. Now glue in each one of these 3 and also one on the outside. I don't need a whole lot. In fact, that is probably too much. Done. Can fold you up. Tape in, tape in. Can fold you up. Tape, tape, hold you in place. Then I can do the remaining 2 at once. Fold you in, tape, tape. And fold you in like that. All good. I can see some slight gaps on one of the pieces, so what I'll do is put some glue on the outside and then just use my finger to mash it in. I'll sand this away anyway, so you won't see this. The other 2 are exactly the same. So the initial gluing is now done, and as I expected, there are some slight gaps in some of the pieces here. It's really just these 2 frames, because the third one looked pretty much fine. Now these are just aesthetic, so the puzzle is still going to function perfectly well. The way to fix these tiny gaps is with that tiny pile of sawdust you might have missed. It's just as simple. Wood glue, and then this specific species of wood you want to actually mend. It's just done by hand. Smear some of the gap, and then poke some sawdust in. That's a nice filler. You need to sand that flat as well, but for the most part, that's done. So I had to do that sawdust trick twice just to get a coverage that I'm happy with, but now I've sanded all of the pieces, and it's time to give these a coating. Because these are going to be in my room, so it's mostly just aesthetic, I'm going to use wood butter. It's an unusual name, but this is basically food safe stain. So for cutting boards or salad tongs or stuff like that, rather than an acrylic based lacquer. It's fairly simple. I have the goo and just a standard microfiber cloth you get from a bike repair shop. Dip it in and apply. Now you can already see just how much that changes the colour. So for this type of project, it really is just aesthetics. 4 smaller pieces done. frames are exactly the same. So with all that said and done, I can finally attempt to assemble this puzzle for the very first time. And I pray to all gods known to man and dolphin kind that I can do this in one go, and do not need to go back over and make some adjustments to the pieces. I've had to do that on multiple occasions. So, in front of me is my CAD software for the actual puzzle design, which I will show you right now. This is the puzzle with the various different colours, as I showed. I'm now in the Solver tab, because this is the solution of the puzzle. If you look here to the left side, there is I can actually play an animation of the moves that I need to do to disassemble the puzzle. That includes these frames as well. So what I need to do is do this entire thing backwards. That is finally the ending of this project and my video for the Puzzle Advent Calendar 2024. I'll have a link in the description to the next person in this series, an Instagram page for this entire series as a whole, and the YouTube playlist for every single video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next year, maybe. Goodbye.